Number 5, Mothman. We had to start with a classic. He was either going to be number 5 or number 1, and I figured we'd get him out of the way first. He's maybe one of the most universally recognized and classic cryptids out there. He's West Virginia's unofficial mascot, and he's as beloved as the Appalachians and buckwheat pancakes. You've probably heard of Mothman a bunch before, but do you know his backstory? You know where his legends and his legacies start? Unless you're a West Virginia native, maybe not, so let's shed some light on the Mothman, because he would probably love that. You know, he's a moth, he's drawn to it. Most Mothman fans agree that his first reported sighting was in the 1960s, 1966 to be exact. The story goes that a young couple, one Roger and Linda Scarberry, had been driving around at night when they saw a large creature whose eyes were glowing red, standing at the side of the road near the site of an old World War II munitions plant. Linda described as being 7 foot tall, muscular, with giant wings and nightmarish glowing red eyes. Upon being illuminated, the creature pursued them all the way to Point Pleasant. Now, one isolated sighting does not make a cryptid legend, so it was probably the repeated sightings that propelled our favorite moth into legend status. For the next few weeks, Virginians kept reporting sightings of a bizarre, large bird-like creature with glowing red eyes. On December 15th, 1967, the Silver Bridge in West Virginia collapsed, with several locals conspiring that the Mothman was involved and could be seen flying away from the crime scene. I always thought he was benevolent, just like a fun, I don't know, guy. I didn't know he did stuff like that. This is unwelcome news. Maybe it's just because we all like the idea of him so much. He does look weirdly cuddly, but Mothman is an absolutely beloved figure to West Virginia and cryptid fans all over. He's kind of larger than life, and it's easy to forget that the first initial sightings and reports of him was that he was a paranormal threat intent on harming humans, considering just how adorable he is now. He's got movies, stuffed toys, and even a festival in his hometown dedicated to celebrating our favorite freak. And if you're looking for more stories of freaks of nature, or the nature of freaks, stories too good to be true and stories too true to be good, well, we've got all of that and then some on Top 5 Scary. Click through, I guarantee you'll find something you like, and then subscribe and stay scared if you do. But hey, keep watching this video first, because we got way more cryptids to get through before we hit the credits. Let's keep going. Number 4, the Rougarou. Oh, that is so fun to say. Say that at home with me around. Rougarou. Oh, rolls off the tongue. Our next entry takes us deep into the swamps of Louisiana. Deep beneath the brush of the bayou, amidst all the flies, crawfish, toads, and gators, lies something sinister in the sunshiny Pelican State. Alright, I'll knock that off. I won't do that for the rest of the video. I won't torture you. The Rougarou is a centuries-old cryptid, a more Cajun answer to the werewolf. The name Rougarou actually is a direct link from the French word for werewolf, loup-garou, shifting over time. If you L to an R if you can hear it there, I don't know. My accent's not great. The history of the Rougarou can vary greatly, with differing legends and conflicting fables telling different stories of the beast's origins or motives, but it can all be traced all the way back to medieval France. Back in those days, a lot could go wrong. Lost crops, your livestock goes missing, your children go missing, your house burns down, all your investments in cryptocurrency go up in smoke, and all your apes get stolen. Any number of terrible things could happen to a French medieval peasant. And when that would happen, instead of cursing out or lashing out at the sky, you would blame the Rougarou for your troubles. It's very easy to pin all your problems on an imaginary werewolf. I do that all the time. I stub my toe, I curse out a werewolf. Villages would capture people who they believed to be acting strangely, or even sometimes just somebody who lived out in the woods, and pin all the blame on the village's problems on them for being a werewolf. So unfair, the discrimination werewolves receive. This tradition of blaming an invisible werewolf for your problems led to the Rougarou becoming a fixture in legends passed down from French Catholics, mostly about behaving. Stories would be told of how if you didn't behave, you didn't follow your parents' rules, the Rougarou would come and he'd snatch you from your bed in the middle of the night and carry you off in the woods. Or sometimes he's like a very Catholic monster. If you didn't adhere to the rules of Lent every year, your sinful ways would see you transforming into a Rougarou. So it's a Catholic werewolf born out of naughty behavior instead of being bit by one. How exactly someone like transforms into a Rougarou is not made super clear, like if it only happens on full moons or if it's a one and done kind of thing and then you're a furry for life. All that's known is that the Rougarou is a deadly creature of the night, stalking the swamps, giving pause to travelers who dare explore the bayou late at night. But hey, so long as you mind your P's and Q's and you promise to give up whatever you said you would for Lent, you and the Rougarou should be headed in different directions. Hopefully. Number 3. Skinwalkers. This one is a very popular cryptid online, and you've probably heard a great deal about them before if you're a fan of this kind of thing. But the term does kind of get thrown around a lot and ends up describing all sorts of things that might not be super accurate. So let's take a look at examining some of the history of the legend and where it stems from. Skinwalkers are apparently like really viral on TikTok. I wouldn't know, I gotta be honest, I try to really limit how much time I'm on that. The Skinwalker is a creature of Navajo legend where it's referred to as a Yi Naldushi, and please forgive me if that's pronounced incorrectly. It translates to, by means of it, it goes on all fours, referring to their tendency to walk like an animal. Navajo witches and skinwalkers go against traditional Navajo values and are seen as the antithesis of their core beliefs. As well, it's worth adding, legends of skinwalkers and Navajo witches are not particularly well known or well told outside of indigenous communities, and some indigenous advocates and groups are not the biggest fan of their folklore and cultural history being made into fodder for ghost stories. Animals commonly associated with skinwalkers are coyotes, wolves, foxes, eagles, owls, or crows, but skinwalkers are said to be able to have the power to assume the form of any animal they see fit. Now, a variation of the legend surrounding the creature is that they're able to extend this ability to taking the face of a human victim, which is extremely scary. Some legends say that skinwalkers gain power from a victim's fear and that they prey on those who are afraid. And some state that looking into the eyes of one will cause your body to seize up, overtaken by the fear, where it will then attack you. On TikTok, as I've come to understand from some very intensive research and definitely not just goofing off at my desk watching TikToks of cats falling down on my phone, is that skinwalkers are popularly thought to be a creature imitating humans or animals and doing a poor job of it. Which case, if that is true, the likelihood of me being a skinwalker? Sky high. Number 2. Mongolian Deathworm. Our next entry is a cryptid whose name really says it all. If you ever hear something get described as a Mongolian deathworm, you have to figure that is probably not the friendliest form of life out there. For starters, it sounds like it would be way more at home in the dunes of Arrakis than it would be on our Earth. That one's for my Frank Herbert heads out there. The creature is also called Ogoi Korkoi, which translates to large intestine worm, which is, that's just lovely. Appetizing. It allegedly lives in the Gobi Desert, has been evading hunters since the 20s when it first rose to prominence. A paleontologist and author going by the name of Roy Chapman Andrew recounted a story he'd heard at a gathering with several Mongolian officials, where they all talked of the worm at great length. Now, no one among them could claim to have actually seen it, but everyone firmly believed in its existence. In this book, he describes the worm as being about 2 feet long, with no head or limbs to speak of, and has such poisonous skin that direct contact is enough to have you buying the farm. It's described as well as having a sprayable venom and an electric discharge. You should probably see a doctor for that. It burrows underground, only coming up to the surface to hunt and eat, presumably. In 1990, Czechoslovakian cryptozoologist, and wow, that's a mouthful, Ivan Macro led a team to try and find the creature in the Gobi Desert. This I love so much because Dune is my favorite book. They used the same technique that the Fremen of Arrakis used to try and find these worms that the Fremen used to deal with the sandworms. They used a rhythmic thumping made from a motor-driven thumper to try and summon the creature out of possible hiding spots. They never found the fabled worm, and that's because they weren't taking spice, so they couldn't see properly. So either it was just a dream, or the thing is very, very good at hiding. And I think with a little work, that could make a fun expression. Like, oh, it's as hard as trying to find a worm in a desert. We'll workshop it. Number 1. Gashadokuro. And our final entry is going to come from Japan, and as a fabled mythological creature, and may I just say, is one of my favorite mythical monsters I've read about in a while. As soon as I was reading about this thing, I started texting my friends. I was so excited about it. This thing is a real-life Dark Souls boss fight. Maybe I'm outing myself as way too much of a nerd here, but this thing is where the inspiration for High Lord Wolnir and Grave Lord Nito of Dark Souls fame came from. I couldn't resist throwing it out there. Sorry, guys. Formed from tens of thousands of bones of fallen soldiers, the Gashadokuro is a massive titan of a beast, a gigantic skyscraper-sized skeleton. Is that not the coolest thing you've ever heard? A giant which wanders around the countryside during the darkest hours of the night. Their teeth chatter and their bones rattle, which is why the translation for their name translates loosely to rattling skull. You'd have to imagine though, you would probably hear this thing chattering its teeth from a few 100 miles away. You'd hear it in the next town over. It's said that the gashadokuro is born when mass amounts of soldiers die on the same battlefield. Their bodies rot in the fields, and they don't receive proper funerary rites. As such, their souls are filled with torment as their bodies lay face down in the muck, and that malice permeates their bones, causing them to twist and mend into unnatural ways, clumping together to eventually form the humongous skeletal monster of a boss fight, the gashadokuro. Now, troublesome for humans, it's said that a gashadokuro is too large and too powerful to be felled by ordinary weapons. Although, I have to wonder if that's still true. I feel like we put more gunpowder in things in 2023 than they did in the Sengoku period, and I'm pretty sure a bulldozer would make short work of a bunch of bones being held together with hatred. It's said that these creatures no longer show up because the amount of dead bodies in one place are not nearly as high as they once were in rural areas of Japan back then, with significantly less wars and plagues occurring, which is a sign of progress, right? You know, if there's so few piles of mass graves that they're no longer reanimating as Godzilla-sized skeleton demons, that's a real positive note for the human race, and I think something we can all smile about. Number 5, snow wasset. Coming up first on our list of icy cold little critters is the snow wasset, a fearsome legless little cryptid and a local one to boot, so I had to include it. Anything that comes from the greater Canada area is a big deal for me. It winters by the Great Lakes in the Hudson Bay, and in the rest of the year crawls up to Newfoundland and Labrador. Totally the wrong time of year, buddy. You gotta go to Newfoundland in the winter for Jig's dinner. Anyway, a snow wasset is like a weasel. It's a long, furry creature, except it has no legs. Except in the summertime, where it does have legs and also turns green. If I was a biologist, I would love to get my hands on this thing and figure that out. That particular part of the lore of this creature is really fascinating to me. Why would a creature shed its legs like baby teeth? What cruel joke of evolution is that? It's like a mammal sandworm. Anyway, I gotta move on. When it's in its legless, winterized form, it burrows deep beneath the snow and ambushes its prey by surprise and drags them into the frozen underground. Absolutely horrifying. A frozen, legless, furry little snake is not pleasant by any definition. A wasset is said to be 4 times as large as a wolverine and 40 times as hungry, requiring a vast amount of meat to keep it sustained. Doesn't shed enough calories shedding those legs. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm so hung up on this, my ghouls, but I am. Maybe it's because there's not actually that much information about the snow wasset out there. Sightings and stories about it date back mostly hundreds of years, and there haven't been too much buzz about them ever since. Perhaps they're extinct. Or perhaps they've all just burrowed under too deep where I can't see them. Either way, the only thing that really stood out for me is they turn green and have no legs, so I'm gonna keep banging on that. And hey, when it's this cold outside, what do you really need to go out for? Stay inside, order some food, turn the heat up, and keep watching Top 5 Scary for the rest of the night. And while you're there, maybe think about tossing a subscribe your way if it's not too much trouble. Number 4, the NUCKELAVEE. Coming up next on this list is the NUCKELAVEE, a cryptid that I had never heard of before researching for this video. So I hope it's new to you too, and you get to learn something cool. The NUCKELAVEE is an old Nordic myth, a demon of the sea appearing as a horrifying, demonic, part horse, part man, part thing hybrid. Seriously, this thing is disgusting. It looks like somebody glued a bunch of leftover horse parts and man parts together, and it's completely skinless, leaving its exposed flesh to all the elements to see. Kinda looks like one of those behind the scenes videos of how they make McDonald's chicken nuggets, you know? The NUCKELAVEE is said to be trapped in the sea during the warmer months of the year, and then come winter is set free to wreak all kinds of havoc. This thing is pure evil, destroys just by breathing. The horsey head part emits toxic fumes just by opening its wretched maw, and this vapor causes crops to wilt, people to fall ill, and drought soon follows after. I see why they keep this thing locked up for most of the year, because it kinda sounds like a royal nuisance. It's thought that the NUCKELAVEE was first created by old Nordic storytellers as a way of rationalizing and explaining away things like drought and plague destroying the harvest. It's much easier to put a face to your problems, and when that problem is a wretched flayed horseman, it's easy to get angry at that. When stories of the NUCKELAVEE were told, it was thought to be so evil that its name was always said in a hushed whisper for fears of speaking too loudly of it could attract its attention. Oh, I wish I knew that about 2 minutes ago. I just said its name like 16 times very loudly. It's said that if you were ever to encounter the dread NUCKELAVEE to find the nearest fresh body of water. This sickly creature of the sea is deathly afraid of fresh water, I guess. You'd think a creature with all that skin exposed wouldn't like salt water or the cold, but hey, there you go, to each their own. You do you, terrifying skinless monster horseman. Number 3, a Chenu. A Chenu is an Algonquin creature of folklore a bit similar to a Wendigo, but with some fun regional twists. While both creatures hunt in wooded northern areas, and are both commonly associated with the wintertime, a Wendigo is usually depicted as a stretched out, emaciated monster, whereas a Chenu is depicted as being massive, very furry, and only getting larger and larger the more it eats. Actually, reading that back now, I realize that's not terribly impressive. Most things get larger larger and larger as they eat. Much like a Wendigo though, a Chennu is thought to have been formerly a man who was turned into a beast, either through their greedy ways, refusing to feed the starving, or for those who give in to the darkest of temptations and consume human flesh willingly. A Chennu is described as looking like a cross between an old man and a beast, large and imposing in appearance, with big chunks of their own flesh missing, possibly self-inflicted. They cover themselves in the forest, hiding themselves with leaves, bark, snow, pine needles, until they look like a horrible lint roller of the woods that walks upright. Interestingly, unlike a Wendigo, it's thought that the process of turning into a Chennu can actually be reversed. There's some good news. In some folk tales, the way to cure a Chennu is a special medicine that can cause them to vomit up their frozen heart and vomit up the flesh that they've consumed, causing the afflicted to revert back to their human form in a sight that is no doubt disgusting for everybody. But if this isn't possible, if you don't have this medicine on hand, or it's just not feasible to trick a Chennu, you can also get it to eat salt, which will apparently melt it from the inside. Poor Chennu. You're forced to live a tormented existence as a snow monster, isolated from your former friends, doomed to hunt on your former species, consuming only the darkest meat available, and you can't even order a little bit of salt for your dinner, eating a totally flavorless diet. I got nothing but sympathy for you, Chennu. Number 3, Kamataichi. I think it's really fascinating what each culture's cryptids look like, you know? Each culture creates cryptids and they all put their fun little spins on it, and whenever I get to make these videos, I learn all sorts of really cool mythological stuff that I'd never heard of before, and I sincerely hope you get that out of these videos too. I'd never heard of this next one, the Kamataichi, but I am obsessed with it now. Coming to us from Japan, this yokai, which is like a Japanese type of demon, appears like a weasel except with razor sharp sickle-like claws, like a real-life Sneasel from Pokemon. I'm actually amazed there's no Pokemon directly based on a Kamataichi. They seem like perfect for it. They have spiny fur, similar to a hedgehog, like prickly little needles, but they bark like a dog, and their claws could not be any sharper, and they're sickle-shaped. And also, a lot of depictions of them are downright adorable. These funny little creatures are extremely lightweight and have learned how to ride the currents of the wind to travel. They honestly sound kind of like radical in like a California surfer way. The legends of the Kamataichi come out of the Chubu region of Japan, when vicious cold winds were so powerful they would cut people down directly. And these legends would take the form of the spirit called the Kamataichi, which was the winds themselves as this furry little miscreant. It would attack at your legs, causing you to fall down, exposed and helpless, while it sucked at your blood. It's said that no blood occurs from their woundings because of this, as a Kamataichi moves so quickly and sucks it all up. That's almost considerate of it, doesn't leave a stain. These creatures move so quickly, and they're so good at hiding, that they're apparently completely invisible to the naked eye, appearing as nothing more than a sharp, freezing wind on your skin. Amusingly, there's some debate as to whether or not a Kamataichi's true origin is actually nothing more than a silly pun. There's a stance samurai would use called a kamaitachi, translating loosely to sword stance, which would explain, you know, it's a sharp thing. I don't know where the stance comes in, but it's sharp. However, there are legends all throughout Japan, throughout many regions, all telling stories of creatures that ride the wind and attack humans, and the sickle weasel remains among the most popular and among the most adorable. Sorry, Kamataichi, you are just so cute. If anybody knows where to get like a stuffed toy of this little guy, please comment under the video. I need to know. Number 1, the Yeti. Coming in at the number 1 spot, a mainstay of any trip to the mountain, the Yeti. I mean, who else could possibly take the number 1 spot on a list about winter cryptids? Maybe Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Does he count as a cryptid? I guess he was. Maybe he's more like a mutant. Anyway, a Yeti is an American manufacturer specializing in outdoor products such as ice coolers, vacuum insulated drinkware, and I'm reading the wrong one. Sorry. Let's do that again. A Yeti refers to an ape-like creature thought to live in the mountains in the Himalayas, standing upright like a man and walking on 2 legs, and is usually pretty big, like 8 feet tall, with long arms, broad feet, and long brownish hair and sunken eyes. It kind of sounded a bit like me, to be honest. While it's pretty common to draw a Yeti as just being like a big giant white gorilla, they're actually pretty different, and most traditional depictions of a Yeti color it with darker fur. They're probably one of the oldest cryptids out there that's still talked about so fondly, with stories of Yetis going all the way back to 326 BC, when Alexander the Great sought out to capture one to see for himself while he was conquering the Indus Valley, although he was told that no Yeti could survive at an altitude low enough to meet beat him. And Alexander wept, for there were no more Yetis left to conquer. It's got several names. It's sometimes called a Sasquatch, or in the West it's popularly referred to as an abominable snowman, although that's a term by British officers who were stationed in the Himalayas, as no natives to the regions call it that. The name Yeti possibly comes from the Tibetan words Yete, meaning a man-like animal, or from Meti, meaning bear in some Nepalese and Tibetan dialects, which would make a good bit of sense, as it's thought that a number of Yeti sightings over the years that led to it being such a widely recognized cryptid could actually just be bear sightings being mistaken in the frosty air. In fact, there's a theory that Yeti sightings are from hybrid polar bears that had bred with grizzly bears, which has been recorded to happen, just not really anywhere where Yeti sightings are really made, so kinda up in the air. In Sherpa tradition, it's said that a Yeti is a powerful, mystical being, and a Yeti can choose to whom it will make itself visible to, choosing to only appear to those who believe in it. So if you're ever trekking the Himalayas and worried about an attack, here's a little advice for you: just don't believe in it. Although there are a good number of people who believe that the Yeti are an intelligent enough species that just want to be left alone to their own devices, living peacefully in the mountains. Not so abominable after all. Number 5. The FRESNO Nightcrawlers. Starting off the list is going to be my favorite cryptids in the whole wide world, the FRESNO Nightcrawler. If you've never seen footage of them, it's going to change your life. Look at them. Look at the way they stride around like a pair of pants that came to life. These things are the absolute perfect cryptid to me. There's never been a story of them hurting anything or anyone. There's no livestock that goes missing when the Nightcrawlers are around. It's just some chill dudes going for a late night stroll. I can really get down with the lifestyle that the FRESNO Nightcrawlers are about. The Nightcrawlers were first spotted in Fresno, California, which makes a lot of sense why they're called that. They've been mostly spotted in California almost exclusively, a couple times, save for one reported sighting in Poland, so must have been a pretty long walk they were going on. The first recorded sighting was by a man in Fresno named Jose, who claimed that during the night he heard his dogs freaking out at something outside. He went to go see what his dogs were making so much noise about, and through a security camera system in his home, he saw the two little crawlers making their way around. He woke up his brother to come watch the footage as well, but by the time he'd awoken, the creature was already gone. The next morning, they called in investigators to inspect the lawn and the footage, but there was absolutely no trace of anything. No footprints, no spots, nothing. All they had was grainy CCTV footage of the Nightcrawlers making their way down the lawn. Since their sighting, there's been endless debate as to just what the Nightcrawlers are. Some suspect spirits or ghosts, because they do look kind of spectral in the video, but a number of people have also put forward the idea that the Nightcrawlers could be visitors from another world. They don't look like anything on this planet, so maybe they came down. Who's to say? The only person who can truly decide is you. And hey, if you want to see loads more videos of things what might be cryptids or what might be aliens, then you already know the vibe. It's Top 5 Scary. We got more videos of cryptids and aliens that you could ever watch, but you're welcome to try. Stay subscribed and don't miss a scream. Number 4. The Enfield Horror. The Enfield Horror is a pretty notable cryptid in American history, and it gets its name from a small string of sightings when it terrorized the town of Enfield, Illinois. The creature has been described as a small, goblin-esque being. Oh, you know how I feel about goblins. It doesn't really resemble any living animals on this planet that it could very easily be described as. It's reported as having 3 legs and leathery skin and moving in a vaguely monkey-esque way compared to a baboon hopping around. So the first time the Enfield Horror was ever spotted, it was in 1973 by one Henry McDaniel. He and his wife had been out that night and were returning home and were greeted by their children. The kids had told their father that there was something they'd seen outside that was trying to get inside the house by scratching on the door. Mr. McDaniel initially assumed it was probably just a cat or a dog, but later on during the night, that peculiar scratching came back again at the front door. He went out to shoo the animal away and was shocked at what he saw. He described to police that it had 3 legs on it, a short body, 2 little short arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. It stood 4.5 feet tall and was grayish colored, and it was trying to get into their house. McDaniel saw this weird little thing and thought best to rid the world of it and fired at it. He claims he struck the creature, telling police that, "When I fired that first shot, I know I hit." He says the creature hissed at him, claiming that it sounded like a wildcat hissing, and then proceeded to bound away in long leaps across the yard. The next day, police were alerted to the story and sent over to investigate the yard as to what happened. They didn't find much, but they did find 3-footed tracks throughout the yard. So just what on earth was the Enfield Horror? Or is that the operative word? Was it of this earth? Could it have been some animal that had lost a leg and was injured limping around? Or is it something that had slipped out of an enclosure from a UFO and was hopping around our planet? it, looking for a new meal. Coming in at number 3 is the chupacabra, one of the most famous cryptids maybe ever in urban folklore. For those somehow not in the know, the chupacabra is often thought to be a canid-like monster, and is purportedly responsible for disappearances of livestock, predominantly throughout Mexico and the American Southwest, but also propping up in places like Puerto Rico. You know, a chupacabra has been around whenever you find that your livestock has either gone missing or is found dead with all its blood sucked right out. This is actually where the name comes from. While most depictions of the chupacabra almost always define it as being a coyote-like creature, albeit a twisted, mangled looking one, usually described as a totally hairless dog with beady black eyes and a sleek figure, there are some stories and sightings of chupacabras that describe it as being more like a demon or an alien, describing it as being a humanoid creature, often reptilian in nature, walking around on 2 legs and feeding on livestock. In all the years since chupacabras have first been reported, though there are countless sightings, there's never been a fully recovered one that we couldn't explain. Everything that's been found by hunters always ends up turning out to be dogs with mange, being misattributed to being the cryptid. So maybe, is it possible that there's been a giant mix-up, and all the sightings of chupacabras that report them as canines are just that, just sick dogs that get mistaken for looking something weird, and that the real chupacabra is the reptilian, more bipedal sightings that get reported. It could explain why there's never been one recovered, and why livestock keeps going missing under bizarre circumstances. It's even possible that the drained livestock could be creatures that have been recovered to study, abducted under bizarre experiments. Could chupacabras themselves be in a bizarre experiment that's been unleashed into our world? A hybrid chimera breed that was created by alien life and let loose on us to run havoc on us? Number 2, the Dover Demon. The Dover Demon looks outright like an alien, maybe more so than anything else on this list. Its description describes it as a pale, naked, leathery creature with a giant watermelon-esque head and no discernible facial features outside of 2 gigantic eyes. Kinda looks like Roger from American Dad. It looks like the exact depiction of a little gray man. The first ever sighting of the Dover Demon was in 1977 in the small town of Dover, Massachusetts. One Bill Bartlett was driving down the road with his friends late at night, until they saw something bizarre creeping along a low wall of loose stones on the side of the road. Initially, Bartlett assumed that it was just a cat, one of the most often mistaken creatures for cryptids. But as the headlights shone on it, he realized it wasn't like anything he had ever seen. The creature slowly looked up to stare at him, and he described it as having peach-colored skin with a rough texture akin to sandpaper. Not long after initially seeing the Dover Demon, it disappeared almost into thin air. The creature vanished. It's been wondered actually by cryptozoologists after this sighting if perhaps the creature had some sort of camouflage ability or some sort of transportation ability even. Given the extreme resemblance to little greys, the alien most commonly described as being the ones responsible for most abductions, could it be possible that the Dover Demon was something scouting out, a creature looking out from above the stars? Could that possibly explain why the creature was able to vanish so quickly? Was it just a remarkably sneaky little fella? Or is it possible that it was technologically advanced in some way or being backed up by someone else who beamed it on back to whatever ship it came from? And finally, at our number 1 spot is the FLATWOODS monster, a creature that has long since thought to be alien in origin and not a cryptid as some have said. The FLATWOODS monster was first sighted in West Virginia because of course it was. Everything creepy is in West Virginia. West Virginia is nothing but beautiful, the most picturesque mountains you've ever seen in your life, and horrifying monsters all the way down. John Denver forgot to tell you that part in the songs. The FLATWOOD monster was described as being 10 feet tall and roughly 4 feet wide. It's described as being more mechanical in nature than it is organic, kind of a Darth Vader deal going on. Its most notable feature is its giant head with 2 gigantic glowing eyes, described as either bright red or bright green depending on who's telling the story, and it's got a giant cowl in the shape of a spade behind this big orb, making it look like a big weird alien vampire. Its body was armored with thick vertical pipes, and it's got spindly little arms. The first ever sighting of the FLATWOOD monster was in the 50s, 1952 to be specific. 3 boys saw something flailing out of the sky, hitting the ground nearby. The boys went home, and one of them told their mother that they thought they'd seen something fall from the sky, maybe an asteroid, and they wanted some help to go check it out. Always a good idea to ask permission from your mom first if you're gonna go check out an alien. Stranger Things kids would have saved themselves so much trouble if they did that. They gathered a small search party together, you know, just in case, and the group gathered and sought out the farm where the object landed, and eventually made their way to the top of the hill, where they saw a large ball of fire and reported smelling some mist that was making their eyes burn. A person in the search party then noticed that there were two bright glowing green eyes that were floating around in the trees, and he flashed his light to unveil what was hiding in the dark. They were then treated to a full view of the Flatwood monster in all of its horror. The creature then hissed at them and flew upwards into the night, never to be seen again. Now, over the years, detractors have claimed that the Flatwood monster could just have been the darkness playing tricks on people's eyes, and that it could have been just a barn owl obscured by shadow. I definitely kind of see that. I see a similar enough face shape. Barn owls are kind of weird looking, but I feel like the size would be hard to misunderstand. Plus, that doesn't really explain off the mist that was making everyone's eyes burn, or the strange thing that fell from the sky. If you ask me, there's a lot more to say the Flatwood monster is an alien than there is to say it's an owl. Number 5. The Loveland frog. First up on our list is the Loveland frog, a cryptid that was new to me but is very quickly winning my heart, and maybe he'll steal yours as well. The Loveland frogman is a mythic humanoid frog that is a legend to the people of Loveland, Ohio, which is where the name comes from. The frogman is described as a 4-foot bipedal frog, mostly appearing to hide around bodies of water. I mean, it's a frog. Where else is it gonna go? It was first sighted in 1955 by a businessman driving home alone at night. He was headed out towards Branch Hill in Ohio when he saw 3 strange, short, squat, bizarre-looking creatures standing on their hind legs alongside the road. He described them all as being 3 to 4 feet tall with leathery-looking skin and faces just like a frog with giant glowing yellow eyes. The frogman would go quiet for a bit and wouldn't be seen again until 1972 when a local police officer was driving home and saw an unidentified 4-foot creature running in front of his car's headlights. When he got a good look at it, the officer described it as a leather-skinned bipedal animal crouching like a frog, and it hurriedly ran towards a river. 2 weeks after that sighting, another Loveland police officer reported seeing the same creature, the same little bipedal frog monster. This officer, however, shot at the frogman and discovered that what he found was a tailless iguana that had grown unusually large. Now, while for some, that was the end of the frogman legend, there are still sightings and reports to this day. As recent as 2016, people are still claiming that they see the Loveland frogman. To the people of Loveland, the frogman is something of a local hero. They love the guy, and I gotta be honest, I sincerely do too. There's something about this cryptid story that's really doing it for me. There's no stories about him eating anybody, the Loveland frog monster's not attacking anybody, he's just a happy little frog guy scurrying across the roads. I sincerely hope they're out there. And hey, you having fun on the channel? Drop a subscribe for new scary videos every single day, twice a day. Let's keep on going. Number 4. The FRESNO NIGHTCRAWLERS. Up next is the FRESNO NIGHTCRAWLERS, and let me just say right now, these are probably my favorite cryptid on the entire list. If I say another one is, I'm lying. It's these guys. Some cryptids are downright terrifying. Some cryptids will keep you up all night, and maybe these guys will too, but I personally find them downright adorable. These are the FRESNO NIGHTCRAWLERS, bizarre, rail-thin bipedal creatures with no discernible features whatsoever. The only footage we have of them is blurry security camera footage, which doesn't help identify the creatures much at all. They appear short with very, very long legs, almost stilt-like. The first reported sighting of one of the Nightcrawlers came from a city in California, Fresno, where the name comes from. A man named Jose was at home late at night with his dog trying to get a good night's sleep, but was repeatedly disturbed by his dog barking at something out the window. He went over to quiet his dogs down and noticed something deeply bizarre on his security camera. He saw a pair of white, elongated creatures strolling down his lawn. The next morning he claims to have seen small footprints all over the lawn. The next sighting of the Nightwalkers was in Carmel, also in California. A former Marine and his wife were driving up a hill, and they claimed that they saw a 7-foot tall creature that they described as a thin, pale, armless white humanoid walking on by. What are the Nightwalkers? They're weirding me out. Are they aliens? Cryptid? Possessed pair of pants? If anyone's got a line, you let us know immediately. Whatever the Nightwalkers are, all I know is that I love them. I think they are downright adorable. I watched a clip of them walking down the hill like 30 times while I was writing this script, so just know that. Number 3, Skinwalkers. Now let's shift to one that's not adorable even a little bit. Skinwalkers are an extremely popular cryptid, a person with the ability to shapeshift into any creature they desire. Sometimes the legends state that in order to shapeshift, they need to molt out of their skin, and in some legends, they have to wear the pelt of the animal they intend to shapeshift into. You know, sometimes skinwalkers are presented as monstrous, sometimes humanoid. The recurring lines through every skinwalker stories, though, is that they are absolutely terrifying, and under no circumstances should you ever look one in the eyes, as it's said that looking one in the eyes will not only draw its attention, but seal your fate. So take a listen to this story from Reddit. This post came to us from a Reddit thread asking, what was the scariest thing that has ever happened to you? And an anonymous Redditor shared this story, and it's probably one one of the scariest things I've ever read. Beginning. I was a kid when this happened. My uncle and I were finishing up gathering firewood from my grandmother because it was getting dark. We were driving back on a dirt road and I had this awful sense of being watched. Before I could turn to look out my window, my uncle shouted, "Don't." My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest, and I heard a tap on the window. My uncle sped up and started praying in our native language. I didn't know what was going on, and I thought it was over until our truck dipped from the bed. My uncle then started saying, "Look at me and don't turn away," over and over. And then I heard it again, tapping from the window behind me. It was getting harder for me to breathe and I wanted to cry. A minute or two passed and the truck dipped. My uncle looked at me and said, "We'll ask your father to do a prayer in the morning so that the evil will forget our faces." Naturally, other people on Reddit were kind of terrified about that story since it's sending a chill down my spine, and they asked him what he thought it was, and the Redditor said simply that he thought it was possibly a skinwalker. What more is there to say? Number 2. The Flatwood Monster. The Flatwood Monster is another West Virginia native, and I've gotta ask, why are there so many cryptid stories coming out of West Virginia? I've never been there, so maybe somebody can clear this up, because all I know about West Virginia is anything John Denver sang about, and he didn't mention Mothman or the Flatwood Monster, but that's a whole different story. Anyway, the Flatwood Monster is a cryptid that's been thought to be an extraterrestrial in nature. It was reported to be 10 feet tall and roughly 4 feet wide. It's described as wearing some sort of mechanical suit like it's Darth Vader rather than a purely organical being, and its most notable feature is its giant bulbous head with 2 gigantic eyes glowing green. It's got a big cowl in the shape of a spade behind it that makes it look a bit like it's an alien vampire, and its body was thick, armored, and it has small, spindly little arms like a T-Rex. Now, the Flatwood Monster's first sighting dates all the way back to 1952, when 3 local boys saw a shining light falling across the sky, eventually hitting the ground nearby at a local farm. The boys returned home to report that they'd seen a UFO crash land and told one of their moms to get a search party going, and honestly, that is exactly what I would do if I ever saw an alien. I would probably still call my mom, to be honest, if I ever saw an alien. From there, they gathered a small search party to go to the farm to approach what they saw. When they reached the top of the hill, they saw a large pulsating ball of fire and smelled a mist that was making their eyes burn. Someone in the search party noticed 2 small lights and flashed his light quickly at them, revealing a creature standing 10 feet tall with glowing green eyes. The creature hissed at them, then glid upwards and head off into the night. What was the Flatwood Monster? Some skeptics have speculated that those eyes could have been that of a barn owl, and the face does kind of light up. The shadow was disguising it, so it would make sense. But that begs to ask, what was the mist? And what was the thing that fell from the sky? Was the Flatwood Monster an alien? And is it just me, or is the Flatwood Monster just the tiniest bit adorable as well? I know it's kind of terrifying, and its bug eyes are gonna haunt my dreams, but does anyone else think it looks a little huggable? It's shaped like a friend? Number 1. Mothman. Mothman is arguably one of the most famous cryptids of all time, and it's captured our heart since he started flapping around in popularity. Mothman's first ever recorded sighting was in 1966 in West Virginia, when 5 men were in a cemetery prepping for a funeral when they saw something bizarre rustling around in the trees nearby, and lifting off was a massive brown-winged creature that disappeared into the night, far too large and unwieldy to be a bird. From there, the legend of the Mothman began to rise. It would get spotted frequently throughout West Virginia and the surrounding states, but its home is West Virginia. 3 days later, after the first sighting of the Mothman, on November 5th, 1966, another sighting occurred. Roger and Linda Scarberry were driving with their friends, another couple, Steve and Mary Millette, around midnight. While driving, the couples noticed that amidst the darkness there were glowing eyes that seemed to be hovering around them. They stalled the car a bit, unnerved about who these mysterious eyes could have belonged to, and through the darkness and the headlights of the car, they saw a creature that stood 7 feet tall with leathery wings folded against its back. The creature began to pursue them rapidly, matching the speed of the car at around 100 miles an hour. They tried to turn around to get a better look at the thing, but the creature screeched and flew upwards into the sky when it was hit by its headlights. Now, this would be far from the last sighting of the Mothman. Since these early sightings, Mothman has been reported hundreds of times across West Virginia. He's practically a pillar of the community. I think he's allowed to vote. Some say he's a benevolent figure who wants to help people and warn them of dangers around, whereas others say that he's a more mysterious, nefarious agent, flying around sending people to their doom. There's an allegation that Mothman was involved in the destruction of a bridge in 1967 that led to the death of 40 people. Some survivors claim that they saw the Mothman flying around overhead after the collapse. Whether he's real, a West Virginian legend, a friend or a foe, there's no denying that like a moth to a flame, we're drawn to the story of the Mothman.